is we're going to talk about a thing called the return statement. Now, I need you to recall, right, the following. When we talked about this stuff, we talked about we talked about a method, right? And we talked about the visibility, the optional thing about it being static, and then the return type. Right now, the return type that we've really studied is just a void, right? And then we had a method name and the parameter list that we use to describe that method, right? Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to actually extend what we learned yesterday, and we're going to go and move on to this thing called a return statement. Now, when you think about it, a method can return a value, because remember, we had our int, we had a void, which could also be returned as an int, a string, a character, or even an object. For example, if we take a look at a concept, the cube of something, right? So when we cube something, we're essentially basically taking x and multiplying it by itself 3 times, right? And all we're going to do is we're going to return the cube of the parameter that we read in, right? Now, eventually we're going to get to something like this, but we have to talk about what the heck is going on here, okay? Now, the return statement is used to send back a value to the calling system. Now, a return statement can only return exactly one value. It could be a collection or an object, but it must simply return a value. Now, that value could be an int, a string, a double, a float, a long, any of those things. Now, when you have a method, it must include the return type in the method declaration. So like we talked about here, when we had our return type of void, basically we didn't have to return anything. But now if we put an int, string, long, or double, or any object here, we have to return that thing to the system, the calling system. Now the return types that we're going to use are going to be double, int, boolean, and abstract types, such as the string class, right? Now, the return type void is used when there's no return value and a method is declared as void if it does not contain a return statement. So just remember, if we have a method that doesn't have a return statement, it's considered void. So try to remember that, okay? All right? Now, those are what we've been building so far, those void methods, right? Now, a method that returns a value from a statement will make use of the return value. So if you think about it, if we made a cubed calculator, we're basically making something that creates the return of it. Now, the one thing I want you to recognize is we have this thing that allows us to document our code and create documentation for all our complex code. So if we have like multiple bits of code that work together, we could go and talk about it later. We'll do that when we build our code today. Now, let's talk about cubed. So when we talk about something that is cubed, right, we're actually talking about something that is cubed with xxx as our number, NNN. Now, here's what we're going to do. When I do this, I basically describe in my first line of my double starred description. This double starred description allows us to document what the heck this thing is supposed to do. So I'm going to say, hey, this is a method that takes in a number and returns the number. Cubed, right? So I'm actually going to put that here. So I'm going to say, all right, boom, I'm going to put that right here. Now, what that does, it allows us to basically make a Java documentation file that actually can be read as an HTML file. So when people want to look at our code, we can take a look at it later. We'll talk about that later when we're building bigger and bigger programs. Now, I'm going to say the return type. The return type in this case is going to be at return double cube number. Now, basically, what you're telling is, I'm saying, whatever I read in, I'm going to cube it and return it to the user. Now, so inside my main method, I don't have anything that does that yet. But in order to basically create this method, I have to, this new method that we're going to create, we got to basically use the same basic signature to get into it. So first of all, we're going to make it public, we're going to make it static, and the variable, we need to think about it. When we go and cube three numbers, we either get an integer or a double. Now, I think the best way to do this is to basically take in say an integer for your first try, and then we're going to make a variable called cubed. And now, there's our method. Right now, you'll notice when I hit enter, this thing is freaking out and saying, hey man, there's a problem here. If you want to check out what the problem is, we take a look. This method must return something of type int, right? So we could either return it as type int or whatever. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a parameter that is going to be used. Now that parameter, I'm going to call it the variable num, or x. Right now, there is x. Right now, I go int x cubed num. So the first thing that I do is I make a cubed num, right? So think of this as a mini program within a program. So we're basically saying, okay, cube num. So the cube num is going to house what we're calculating for this small section of code. So I'm going to basically call it cubed num is equal to, well, x times x times x. Isn't that what a cubed num is? Now remember, it's still complaining about our return statement, so we're going to add a return statement, right? Now, here's the best part. I love this, so I tend to do this. Go to the end, and I go return whatever I calculated. So that returns my cubed number. So now, in my main method, if I want to use this, remember, we're using almost the same signature, public static, so that means we can use the method directly here. So let's go and create a scanner. We'll basically import our scanner, and then once we've done that, so we'll tell the computer to enter it. We'll tell the person to enter an integer, and then we'll store it. Int and int equals input.nextInt. So we get the data from the user, and then we make a variable. Let's call it cubed. Let's call it cubed. Cubed integer is equal to, well, int cubed integer is equal to, well, we basically go, all right, cubed, because this is our code here. That is the name of our code, and we go cubed. And now we're just going to pass it an int. Now that I've stored that, let's go and output the result. Cubed of space plus an int is space plus. Now let's explain to you what's happening here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to basically read in the input and store it in anint, right? Now that I've done that, I basically make another temporary variable. I call it cubed integer, right? So I said let cubed integer be what I'm going to store it in. Store the return of what's happening. So when I run cubed int, the computer goes and jumps up to here where cubed int is, right? And then it says, okay, dude, we make a variable inside here, call it cubed num. And then we basically cube it, and then we return a copy of cube num directly into cubed integer that is stored in our main method. And that's it. Now, when I run this, enter an integer, if I go and say, all right, so let's say I put the number 12, right? Let's put the number 3. So we know that 3 cubed should be 27. So when we run this, the cubed of 3 is 27. That's literally how we do this. Now, if we go back to our code, you'll notice that in order to handle our code better, we use the bigger variable that is used for us. So instead of cubed, I would actually return this as a double. And I take this as a double, and I make my integer make this a double as well, right? And so I return everything as doubles. So whatever goes in, I change. So if this part, if cubed int is supposed to be a double and cubed integer is an integer, then this thing doesn't work. In order to do that, in order to change that, I just have to change this to a double. And change this to, I'm going to now show you how to use a thing called refactor. So let's say you want to change a variable that's used everywhere in your code. Right? Highlight the code, go to source, go to refactor, and then hit rename. So instead of cubed integer, I want to change this to cubed double. And I hit enter. Now, you see this part that we stored to read in an integer? Cubed still works because an integer is also a double, but not the other way around, right? So when I read my integer from the computer, I could literally do this: double and int equals input.nextInt. And you notice how there's no error with our integer here, right? The reason why that is because doubles contain integers, but integers do not contain doubles, right? So when you run this, it still should work. So if I put in, say, 3.2, oh my god, it breaks! Now why did it break? The reason why it breaks is because we used a next int instead of a next double. And basically we've made some more rock type code, steel type code. So basically we got good kung fu here by handling our code in such a way that we can punch in like decimals. Ooh, look at that. 3.2 cubed is 32.768. Now, let's go back to our note and we'll go and take a look at what they said. Now, if you want, you can go and take a look at the note and then try it out in your own code. Okay? Now, basically, when we run this code, right, the method basically returns the value from the statement and from the statement of the return value. So basically, when we return our cube thing, it goes into our code. So if you take a look at this public thing here, I've basically taken the number 2.0, throw it in here, and then I get my cube back. But you'll notice the cube of method jumps up here, passes a variable in, and that's it. You're good to go, right? It just returns everything. And basically, because we're basically using variables to kind of hold all these things, if I punch in a number of 2.0, basically the cubed application outputs just 8. That's it. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to try making your own return methods. The lesson will have an assignment at the end of it. Try. All right. Have a good day.